What happens when the daughter deemed worthless becomes the warrior an immortal has been seeking for centuries? Tonight, we enter Victorian Edinburgh, 1893, where 17-year-old Isla Morgan has spent her entire life being called weak by her military father. Too fragile for physical training, too sickly to join her brothers in combat exercises, too delicate to bring anything but shame to a family built on warrior traditions spanning generations. Colonel Robert Morgan has 4 sons who excel in military pursuits and 1 daughter who faints during sword practice, who struggles to lift weapons her younger brothers wield easily, who represents everything he despises about weakness in a world that values strength above all else. He calls her the Shame openly, refuses to acknowledge her at family dinners, and has essentially disowned her while she still lives under his roof. Isla has internalized this assessment completely, believing herself fundamentally defective, wishing she'd been born different, accepting that she'll never be worth her father's acknowledgement. But when a mysterious martial arts instructor named Kieran Nightborn arrives in Edinburgh offering to train students in ancient combat techniques, and specifically requests Isla as his first pupil, claiming he senses warrior potential her family can't recognize, everything changes. Because Kieran isn't human. He's a 4,000-year-old alpha vampire who spent millennia training the greatest warriors in history, and he recognizes what Isla's father cannot see. Her weakness is actually a rare form of supernatural sensitivity that will make her the most formidable fighter he's ever trained once she learns to channel it properly. And he's not letting ignorant humans convince his destined mate that she's anything less than the warrior she was born to become. Subscribe now, because this story will prove that true strength comes in forms those obsessed with physical power are too blind to recognize. Isla Morgan sat in the corner of the training yard, watching her 4 brothers spar, with their father's approval radiating across the space. At 17, she should have been training alongside them, but her body had other plans. Plans that involved fainting spells, chronic fatigue, and physical weakness that made even basic sword drills impossible. Pathetic, her father, Colonel Robert Morgan, muttered as he passed her, not bothering to lower his voice. 4 strong sons who'll make excellent soldiers, and 1 daughter who can't even stand through morning exercises. The Morgan family has produced warriors for 6 generations, and you're the first to bring us shame. Isla flinched, but said nothing. What could she say? He was right. Her brothers, even 13-year-old Duncan, could outlast her in any physical contest. They could lift weapons she struggled to hold, could train for hours without the dizzy spells that plagued her constantly, could bring their father pride instead of disappointment. "She's ill, father," her oldest brother James said carefully. "Perhaps if we consulted different physicians." "She's weak," Colonel Morgan interrupted. "There's no illness. Just fundamental lack of constitution that makes her unsuitable for our family line. I should have married her off years ago. But what man wants a wife who faints at the sight of blood? She's useless for military alliance and too fragile for producing strong children. She's simply worthless." Isla felt tears threatening, but refused to cry in front of them. She'd learned years ago that showing emotion only confirmed her father's assessment of her weakness. Instead, she rose carefully, moving slowly to avoid triggering the dizziness, and retreated to the house. In her room, she stared at her reflection. Pale skin, dark circles under green eyes, a frame that seemed too thin despite eating normally. She looked fragile because she was fragile. Every assessment her father made was accurate, which made it impossible to argue against. The Morgan family descended from Scottish warrior clans. Military service was expected, excellence was mandatory, and weakness was unforgivable. Her brothers understood this and thrived under the pressure. Isla understood it and crumbled. "I wish I'd never been born," she whispered to her reflection. Or at least born into a different family, where physical strength wasn't the only measure of worth. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Isla?" the housemaid Annie called. "Your father requests your presence in the study. There's a visitor who's asked to meet you specifically." Isla's stomach dropped. Visitors never asked for her. They asked for her father or brothers. This was probably some distant relative come to lecture her about bringing shame to the family name. She descended the stairs with dread, entering her father's study to find him looking unusually confused. Beside him stood a man who made Isla's breath catch involuntarily. He was striking, tall with black hair, golden eyes that seemed to glow in the afternoon light, and features that suggested both danger and beauty simultaneously. He moved with fluid grace that made everyone else seem clumsy by comparison. "Miss Isla Morgan," the stranger said, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place. "I'm Kieran Nightborn. I'm a martial arts instructor seeking a student with very specific qualities. Your father mentioned you. I'd like to offer you private training in combat techniques your family hasn't encountered. Will you accept?" Isla stared at Kieran, certain she'd misheard. "You want to train me? In combat?" "I don't want to train just anyone," Kieran corrected. "I want to train you specifically. I've observed your family's training methods, and I recognize something in you that they've missed entirely. You possess potential for a form of combat mastery your brothers could never achieve, regardless of their physical advantages." Colonel Morgan laughed harshly. "Mr. Nightborn, I appreciate your interest in our family, but you're wasting your time with Isla. She faints during sword practice. She can't complete basic drills. She's physically incapable of combat training. If you want a student, take one of my sons. They're actual warriors." "I don't want your sons," Kieran stated flatly. "They're conventionally strong, which makes them conventionally limited. Isla possesses something far more valuable, sensitivity that allows perception beyond normal human range. Once properly trained, she'll surpass any fighter you've ever produced. But only if you stop treating her supposed weakness as liability rather than recognizing it as the asset it actually is." "That's absurd," Colonel Morgan protested. "How can physical weakness be an asset in combat?" "Because combat isn't purely physical," Kieran explained patiently. "The greatest warriors throughout history understood that perception, timing, and strategic thinking matter far more than brute strength. Isla's sensitivity means she'll sense attacks before they develop. Will read opponents in ways your sons never could. Will fight with precision rather than force. But she needs training and techniques you don't know exist. That's what I'm offering." Isla wanted desperately to believe him, but years of conditioning made hope difficult. "Mr. Nightborn, I appreciate the offer, but my father's right. I'm not capable of combat training. I faint. I'm weak. I can't even lift a standard sword properly. Whatever you think you see in me, you're mistaken." "I'm not mistaken," Kieran replied with absolute certainty. "But I understand you've been convinced otherwise. So I'll make you a proposal. Give me 30 days of training, 3 hours each afternoon, private sessions where only you and I are present. If after 30 days you haven't seen remarkable improvement, I'll admit I was wrong and never bother you again. But if I'm right, if you develop abilities your family never imagined possible, then you'll continue training with me. Will you accept those terms?" Colonel Morgan scoffed. "This is ridiculous. You're giving her false hope. I'm giving her accurate assessment of her potential, Kieran interrupted. Something no one in this family has bothered to provide. Isla, this decision is yours. Your father can't prevent adult daughter from accepting private martial arts instruction. Will you give me 30 days to prove you're not weak, just untrained in the specific techniques your abilities require? Isla looked at her father's dismissive expression, her own reflection in the window showing the fragile girl everyone saw, and Kieran's confident face suggesting he saw something entirely different. Yes, she heard herself say. 30 days. But Mr. Nightborn, when you realize I'm actually as weak as my father claims, please don't feel obligated to continue out of pity. Deal, Kieran agreed with a slight smile. Though I promise you, pity won't be necessary. The training began the following afternoon in a private studio Kieran had rented specifically for their sessions. Isla arrived expecting weapons and drills similar to what her brothers practiced. Instead, she found an empty room with cushions on the floor. "Where are the weapons?" she asked, confused. "We're not starting with weapons," Kieran replied. "We're starting with understanding what you actually are." "Sit down, Isla. I need to explain something about your weakness that no human physician would recognize." Isla sat cautiously, still expecting this to be an elaborate prank or misguided charity project. "Your fainting spells, your chronic fatigue, your inability to tolerate normal combat training, none of that indicates weakness," Kieran began. "It indicates supernatural sensitivity that's been overwhelming you because no one taught you to control it. Isla, you're perceiving things constantly that others can't detect. Emotional energies, environmental fluctuations, subtle changes in your surroundings. Your body is processing massive amounts of sensory data every moment, which is exhausting you because you don't know how to filter or channel it." "That's impossible," Isla protested. "I don't perceive anything special. I'm just weak and sickly." "You're neither weak nor sickly," Kieran interrupted firmly. "You're untrained. Tell me honestly, when you're in crowds, do you feel overwhelmed by sensations you can't quite identify? When someone's upset, do you feel their emotions as if they're your own? When danger is near, do you sense it before anything visible happens?" Isla stared at him, shocked. "How do you know that?" "I thought everyone experienced those things." "They don't," Kieran confirmed. "Normal humans don't perceive emotional energy or sense danger before physical evidence appears. But you do, constantly, which is why you're exhausted all the time. Your system is being flooded with information you don't know how to process. That's what I'm going to teach you, how to control and channel that sensitivity instead of being overwhelmed by it." "Even if that's true, how does it help with combat?" Isla asked. "Because sensitivity like yours is the foundation of the most devastating combat style ever developed," Kieran explained. "When you can sense your opponent's intent before they move, when you can read their emotional state and predict their actions, when you can perceive environmental factors others miss, you become nearly impossible to defeat. Physical strength becomes irrelevant when you're fighting with perfect information and supernatural awareness." "And you can teach me this?" Isla asked, hope warring with ingrained disbelief. "I can," Kieran confirmed. "But Isla, you need to understand something important. This training will be difficult not because you're weak, but because you're strong in ways that require completely different approach than conventional combat training. You'll need to unlearn everything your family taught you about strength and accept that your sensitivity is gift, not curse. Can you do that?" Isla thought about her father's contempt, her brother's pity, the lifetime of believing herself fundamentally defective. Could she accept that maybe, possibly, she'd been assessing herself incorrectly all along? "I'll try," she said quietly. "But Mr. Nightborn, if this doesn't work, if I really am just weak—" "You're not," Kieran stated with finality. "And I'm going to prove it." Now let's begin. The first week of training was unlike anything Isla had experienced. Instead of weapons drills or physical exercises, Kieran taught her meditation techniques designed to control the overwhelming sensory input she'd been experiencing unconsciously her entire life. "Close your eyes," Kieran instructed during their third session. "Now, instead of trying to block out everything you're sensing, I want you to acknowledge it deliberately. Feel the air currents in the room. Sense the emotional residue from people who've been in this space. Notice the subtle vibrations from activity in nearby buildings. Don't fight the information. Just observe it without being overwhelmed." Isla tried, and for the first time in her life, the constant background noise she'd always experienced began making sense. She could feel Kieran's presence across the room, not just visually, but as a distinct energy signature unlike anything human. She could sense the emotional impressions left in the space: previous occupants' frustration, joy, anxiety. She could perceive things she'd never consciously acknowledged before. "I can feel everything," she whispered. "It's not just imagination. It's real." "It's absolutely real," Kieran confirmed. "And you've been feeling it your entire life without anyone teaching you what it was or how to control it. That's why you were exhausted constantly. Your system was processing all this data without any filters or framework. Now we're going to teach you to channel it deliberately instead of being passively overwhelmed." Over the following sessions, Kieran taught Isla to categorize and filter the sensory information. Dangerous energies versus neutral ones. Emotional states that indicated threat versus simple background noise. Environmental factors that mattered versus those that didn't. "This is what warriors with your abilities should have learned in childhood," Kieran explained. "But since no one recognized what you were, you've been trying to function with supernatural senses you didn't know how to control. It's like having perfect vision, but no one teaching you that closing your eyes stops light from overwhelming you. You weren't weak. You were just operating without instruction manual." "Why didn't the physicians recognize this?" Isla asked. "Because they're looking for physical causes," Kieran replied. "They're examining your body for disease when the issue is supernatural capability they don't believe exists. Human medicine can't diagnose supernatural sensitivity because humans aren't supposed to possess it. You're an anomaly, Isla. Someone born with abilities that should be impossible." "But how do I have these abilities if they're impossible?" Isla questioned. Kieran hesitated, then said carefully, "Because you're my destined mate, and the mate bond is already beginning to influence your biology, even though you're still human. Your sensitivity is preparation for eventual transformation. Your human body developing capabilities that will make vampire existence easier to adapt to. But we'll discuss that later. For now, focus on mastering the sensitivity you already possess." By the end of the first week, Isla could sit in meditation for an hour without fainting, could filter sensory input well enough to function in crowds without becoming overwhelmed, and could deliberately sense Kieran's presence even when he moved silently behind her. "This is impossible," she said wonderingly. "A week ago I couldn't complete basic drills. Now I can sense things I didn't know existed." "This is just the beginning," Kieran replied with satisfaction. "Now we start actual combat training. And Isla, your father has no idea what you're becoming." Week 2 introduced actual combat techniques, but nothing like what Isla's brothers practiced. Kieran taught her to sense intent before movement, to read opponents through energy rather than visual cues, to respond to attacks she couldn't physically see. Traditional combat relies on watching your opponent's body for tells, Kieran explained as they began sparring. But you don't need visual tells when you can sense intention directly. Feel my energy. I'm going to attack in 3 different ways. Tell me which one I'm actually intending before I move. Isla closed her eyes, extending the supernatural awareness she was learning to control. She could feel Kieran's energy shift as he considered different attacks. One was feint, one was misdirection, one was genuine intent. Left side, she said confidently. Low sweep aimed at destabilizing my stance. Correct, Kieran confirmed, executing the attack smoothly. Isla, sensing it coming, shifted her weight preemptively and maintained balance. See? You just defended against an attack you couldn't see coming because you felt it developing. That's combat at a level your brothers will never achieve. Over the following sessions, Kieran taught Isla techniques specifically designed for fighters with supernatural sensitivity. Economy of movement that conserved energy. Precision strikes aimed at vulnerable points she could sense even when obscured. Defensive positioning that accounted for attacks she perceived before they manifested. You're not fighting with strength, Kieran explained. You're fighting with perfect information. Every opponent has weaknesses, blind spots, patterns. Normal fighters identify these through extended observation. You perceive them instantly through direct sensing. That makes you exponentially more dangerous than someone who relies on brute force. Isla found herself actually enjoying training for the first time in her life. Unlike the drills her father imposed, which exhausted her within minutes, this combat style worked with her natural abilities instead of against them. She wasn't trying to be strong enough to overpower opponents. She was learning to be aware enough to defeat them with precision. I sparred with my brother Duncan yesterday, Isla admitted during their 10th session. Just light practice, nothing serious. But Kieran, I could sense every attack he was planning before he executed it. I won easily, and I wasn't even trying hard. He thought I was cheating somehow because I kept responding to attacks he hadn't started yet. That's because you're operating at fundamentally different level than conventional fighters, Kieran said with evident pride. Your brother is excellent by normal standards, but normal standards don't account for supernatural perception. As you continue developing these abilities, the gap between you and conventional fighters will become even more pronounced. My father still thinks I'm weak, Isla said quietly. He sees me going to training sessions but assumes you're being charitable. He doesn't know I'm actually learning anything. Would you like to demonstrate? Kieran suggested. Show your family what you've become? Isla considered. Part of her desperately wanted her father's acknowledgement, but another part, the part growing stronger daily, recognized that she no longer needed his validation. Not yet, she decided. Let's wait until the 30 days are complete. Then I'll show them exactly how wrong they've been about me. As you wish, Kieran agreed. But Isla, whether your father acknowledges it or not, you're already becoming the warrior you were meant to be. On day 15 of training, Kieran finally revealed what Isla had begun suspecting. He wasn't entirely human. You've noticed I'm different, Kieran stated rather than asked. Your sensitivity has been growing stronger, and you're starting to perceive what I actually am. So I'm going to be honest before you draw incorrect conclusions. I'm a vampire, Isla. I've existed for 4,000 years, and I possess abilities far beyond human limitations. Isla should have been shocked, but somehow the revelation felt like confirmation of what she'd already sensed. That's why your energy feels different from everyone else's. That's why you know so much about combat styles from different eras. You've actually lived through history. Exactly, Kieran confirmed. And Isla, there's more you need to understand. The reason I specifically sought you out, the reason I recognized your potential when your family couldn't, it's because you're my destined mate. Vampires have a biological mechanism that identifies the one person whose soul resonates perfectly with ours. I sensed that connection to you from across the city, and I knew immediately that you possessed potential far beyond what humans could recognize. Your mate, Isla repeated slowly. That's why I have these supernatural abilities? Because of connection to you? Partially, Kieran acknowledged. The mate bond is already beginning to influence your biology, even though you're still human, developing sensitivities that will make eventual vampire transformation easier. But Isla, you also have natural talent that exists independently of our connection. You would have possessed some degree of supernatural perception even without the mate bond. Our connection simply amplifies and focuses abilities you were born with. And you want to transform me into a vampire? Isla guessed. Eventually, if you choose it, Kieran replied. But not yet. Not until you've fully developed your human capabilities and decided from position of strength rather than desperation. I want you to complete your training, show your family what you've become, and prove to yourself that you're powerful exactly as you are. Then, if you choose immortality and enhanced abilities, that decision will come from confidence rather than self-doubt. What if I don't want transformation? Isla asked carefully. Then we'll continue as we are, Kieran said simply. The mate bond creates connection and attraction, but it doesn't override free will. You can reject transformation, reject me, choose entirely human existence. I'll be disappointed, but I'll respect your decision. You're not obligated to accept immortality just because we're destined mates. Isla processed this information, feeling surprisingly calm about the revelation that vampires existed, and she was apparently destined for one. Can I ask you something honest? Always, Kieran replied. Do you actually think I have warrior potential? Or are you training me because of the mate bond? Because if this is just supernatural romance driving your interest, I need to know. I think you have extraordinary potential that would be valuable regardless of our connection, Kieran stated firmly. The mate bond is why I recognized it, but your actual abilities are why I'm investing this time and effort. Isla, in 4,000 years, I've trained countless warriors. You're developing faster than most of them did. That's talent, not mate bond magic. You're genuinely gifted, and your family's too blind to recognize it. On day 30, Isla arrived at training with determination she'd been building throughout the month. I want to demonstrate for my family. Show them what I've learned, but not just sparring. I want to challenge one of my brothers to formal match. Will you help me arrange it? Kieran studied her carefully. You're ready skill-wise, but are you ready emotionally? Your father's rejection has damaged you deeply. If he still refuses to acknowledge your growth, will you be able to handle that? I don't need his acknowledgement anymore, Isla replied, surprised to realize she meant it. A month ago, his approval was everything. Now I know what I'm capable of. I know I'm not weak or shameful. If he can't recognize that, it's his limitation, not my failure. But I want to demonstrate anyway, not for him, but for me. I want to prove to myself how far I've come. Then we'll arrange it, Kieran agreed. The formal match was set for the following weekend in the family's training yard. Isla chose to spar with Cameron, her second oldest brother, who was considered the most technically skilled fighter in the family. Her father agreed dismissively, clearly expecting Ayla to embarrass herself and finally prove definitively that she was unsuitable for warrior traditions. When the day arrived, Ayla felt calm. Not confident exactly. She was still learning to believe in her own abilities, but centered in a way she'd never experienced before. She could sense everyone's expectations, her father's contempt, her brother's pity, Cameron's patronizing certainty that he'd need to go easy on her. The match began with traditional rules: 3 successful strikes to vulnerable points, with protective gear to prevent actual injury. Cameron attacked immediately with standard opening combination: feint high, actual strike low, follow-up to midsection. Ayla sensed all 3 attacks before they developed and responded fluidly, deflecting each strike with minimal movement while simultaneously perceiving Cameron's surprise at her competent defense. "Lucky block," Cameron muttered, attacking again with more force. But it wasn't luck. Ayla could feel every attack he planned in the moment before execution. She defended effortlessly, her supernatural awareness compensating completely for Cameron's superior physical strength. Then, sensing opening in his guard, she struck precisely at 3 vulnerable points in rapid succession: shoulder, ribs, thigh, each hit controlled but undeniable. The yard went silent. "Match to Ayla," Kieran announced formally. 3 successful strikes. Cameron stared at her in disbelief. "How did you— I didn't even see those attacks coming. You moved faster than I could track." "I didn't move faster," Ayla corrected quietly. "I moved more efficiently. There's a difference." Her other brothers erupted in excited questions, clearly amazed by her sudden competence. But Ayla's attention focused on her father, watching his face cycle through shock, confusion, and then, heartbreakingly, anger. "She cheated somehow," Colonel Morgan declared. "No one improves that dramatically in 30 days. She must have used tricks or deception." "I used training," Ayla interrupted firmly. "Training and techniques you don't recognize because they're based on perception rather than brute force. I'm not weak, Father. I never was. You just couldn't recognize strength that didn't match your narrow definition. That's your failure, not mine." For the first time in her life, Ayla walked away from her father without waiting for his approval. Following the demonstration, Ayla's family dynamics shifted dramatically. Her brothers suddenly treated her with respect, seeking her input on training techniques and acknowledging her skill. But her father remained coldly distant, seemingly incapable of accepting that his assessment of her had been wrong. "He'll never admit he was mistaken," Ayla told Kieran during their next private session. "And I'm realizing I don't need him to. For 17 years, I believed my worth depended on his approval. But now I understand that his inability to recognize my value says everything about his limitations and nothing about my actual abilities." "That's mature perspective," Kieran observed, "particularly for someone so young. You've grown significantly beyond just combat skills." "Because you taught me more than fighting," Ayla replied. "You taught me that strength comes in forms people don't always recognize. That being different isn't the same as being defective. That I get to define my own worth rather than accepting other people's assessments. Those lessons matter more than any combat technique." "So what will you do now?" Kieran asked. "Continue living with your family while training with me? Leave and build independent life? Accept vampire transformation and leave human existence entirely? You have options, Ayla." "What do you actually want?" Ayla considered carefully. "I want to continue training. I want to develop these abilities fully and discover what I'm truly capable of. But Kiran, I also want to understand this mate bond better before making any permanent decisions about transformation. Can we do that? Continue as we are while I figure out what I actually want rather than rushing into immortality? Absolutely, Kiran confirmed. In fact, I prefer that approach. I want you to choose transformation from position of confidence and clarity, not from desperation to escape difficult family situation. Take whatever time you need. I've waited 4,000 years to find you. I can wait a few more years while you develop fully. A few years? Isla questioned. You're 17, Kiran pointed out gently. Still developing physically and emotionally. I'd recommend waiting until at least 21 before considering transformation. Give yourself time to experience human adulthood, to explore who you are outside your family's shadow, to make this decision as mature adult rather than desperate teenager. The mate bond isn't going anywhere, and neither am I. That's actually really respectful, Isla said, surprised. I expected you'd want to transform me immediately. I want you to be happy and certain, Kiran replied. Not transformed before you're ready. Isla, you're going to live for millennia if you accept transformation. What's a few years of waiting to ensure you're making the right choice? Besides, watching you continue developing these abilities as human is genuinely fascinating. You're accomplishing things most vampires with supernatural senses don't achieve. I'm curious to see how far you can go. Then we continue as we are, Isla decided. Training sessions, developing abilities, maybe eventually moving out of my father's house into my own residence. Living my own life on my own terms while figuring out what I actually want long term. Does that work for you? Perfectly, Kiran agreed with warm smile. Now, shall we continue with today's training? I want to teach you advanced techniques for fighting multiple opponents simultaneously. Over the following year, Isla transformed not just her combat abilities, but her entire life. She moved out of her father's house at 18, using modest inheritance from her late grandmother to rent small apartment in Edinburgh. She continued intensive training with Kiran while also pursuing education in subjects she'd always found interesting: philosophy, languages, history. You're thriving, Kiran observed during one of their sessions. The difference between the fragile girl I met and the confident woman you're becoming is remarkable. Because I'm finally living authentically, Isla explained. Not trying to fit my father's definition of warrior, not apologizing for being different, not hiding abilities that make me unusual. I'm just being myself, developing my natural talents, building life that actually suits who I am. It's liberating. Her relationship with Kiran deepened naturally over months of working together. The mate bond created baseline attraction and compatibility, but genuine affection developed through shared experiences and mutual respect. Kiran treated her as equal despite his 4 millennia of experience, valuing her insights and perspective rather than dismissing them because of her youth. I'm falling in love with you, Isla admitted one evening after a particularly intense training session. Not because of the mate bond, though I'm sure that's influencing things, but because you're a genuinely good person who sees me as I actually am rather than what others expect me to be. That's rare, Kiran, and I'm grateful for it. I fell in love with you the moment I sensed your presence, Kiran confessed. But I've fallen deeper watching you claim your own power, build your own life, become the person you were always meant to be. You're extraordinary, Isla, and I'm honored to be part of your journey. I think I want transformation, Isla said carefully. Not immediately, maybe wait another year or two as you suggested. But eventually, yes. I want to spend eternity with you, developing these abilities to their full supernatural potential, living as vampire warrior rather than limited human. Is that offer still available? Always, Kieran confirmed. But Isla, let me ask something important. Are you choosing transformation because you want immortality and enhanced abilities, or because you want to escape remaining human limitations and family rejection? Both, honestly, Isla replied, but mostly the former. My family's rejection still hurts, but I'm healing from that. What I want now is the chance to be everything I can be, and that means accepting supernatural nature fully rather than trying to function as human with vampire-adjacent abilities. I want transformation because it's natural next step in my development, not because I'm running from anything. That's exactly the right motivation, Kieran said with satisfaction. Then we'll plan for transformation in approximately 2 years when you're 20. That gives you time to finish developing as human, to be absolutely certain about your choice, and to prepare mentally and emotionally for the changes immortality brings. Does that timeline work for you? Perfectly, Isla agreed. 2 years to be the best human warrior I can be, then eternity to discover what I'm capable of as vampire. I'm looking forward to it. So am I, Kieran replied warmly. Now, shall we continue? I want to teach you techniques for sensing opponents through walls. 2 years after Isla moved out, her father unexpectedly appeared at her apartment. She'd had minimal contact with her family during that time. Occasional letters from her brothers, but nothing from Colonel Morgan, who'd apparently decided she was dead to him. Isla, he said stiffly when she answered the door. I need to speak with you. May I come in? Isla considered refusing, but curiosity won. All right. But I have training session with Kieran in an hour, so this needs to be brief. Her father entered, looking uncomfortable in her small but well-appointed space. You're still training? After 2 years? I'm still developing my abilities, Isla corrected. Combat training is an ongoing process, not something you complete and stop. I'll be training for the rest of my life, actually. What did you want? Colonel Morgan seemed to struggle with what to say. I've been observing reports of your progress. Your brothers mention you occasionally. They say you've continued improving, that you're now more skilled than any of them, despite still being young. Cameron said sparring with you is like fighting an opponent who reads his mind. I don't read minds, Isla said. I sense intent and energy. Different mechanism, similar effect. It's the sensitivity you spent 17 years calling weakness, properly trained and channeled. I was wrong, her father said abruptly. About you. About your abilities. About what constitutes strength. I spent decades believing physical power was the only measure of warrior capability. But watching you, watching how you've developed, I'm forced to acknowledge that I was catastrophically wrong. You're not weak. You never were. You're just strong in ways I didn't understand. Isla felt something shift in her chest. She'd convinced herself she didn't need her father's acknowledgement, but hearing it still mattered more than she'd expected. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. 2 years later, after making it clear you considered me shameful embarrassment. Because I was wrong, Colonel Morgan repeated. And because I'm about to die, and I don't want to leave this world with that unresolved between us. I have cancer, Isla. Advanced. The physicians give me perhaps 3 months. And before I go, I needed you to know you're not shame. Your honor. The honor of being so strong that you continued pursuing your abilities despite everyone telling you they were worthless. The honor of building life on your own terms, rather than accepting the limitations I tried to impose. The honor of being a better person than I taught you to be. I'm proud of you, Isla. I should have said that 17 years ago, but I'm saying it now. Isla felt tears threatening. Thank you. That means more than I expected it to. I'm sorry you're dying, Father. Despite everything, I don't want you to suffer. I know, her father said. You're better than I deserved. But Isla, before I die, would you show me, really show me what you've become? Let me see the warrior I was too blind to recognize. Yes, Isla agreed. I'd like that. Tomorrow, if you're well enough, I'll demonstrate exactly what your shameful daughter has achieved. The following day, Isla arranged a demonstration at Kieran's training facility. Her father arrived looking frailer than she'd ever seen him, but his eyes held genuine interest as he watched her prepare. This won't be like the demonstration 2 years ago, Isla explained. I'm significantly more advanced now. Kieran's going to attack me with lethal intent, obviously controlled so no one actually does, but you'll see combat at level your training methods never approached. What followed was 15 minutes of movement so fluid and precise that Colonel Morgan could barely track it. Kieran attacked with supernatural speed and strength, and Isla defended and countered by sensing attacks before they manifested. She moved like water, like wind, like something not entirely human anymore. Her supernatural sensitivity had developed to the point where she was essentially precognitive in combat situations. My God, her father whispered when the demonstration ended. I've never seen anything like that. That's not conventional combat. That's art. That's mastery at level I didn't know existed. That's what I tried to tell you 17 years ago, Isla said without malice. That strength comes in forms you didn't recognize. That my weakness was actually sensitivity requiring different training approach. That dismissing me as shameful was your failure of perception, not my failure of capability. I understand that now, Colonel Morgan acknowledged. Isla, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but will you forgive me? For the years of rejection, for calling you shame when you were honor, for nearly destroying your confidence in yourself? I can't change what I did, but I can apologize and hope it matters. Isla considered. Forgiveness felt complicated. She'd spent years healing from his rejection, building confidence despite his contempt. But he was dying, and holding anger felt less important than finding closure. I forgive you, she said quietly. Not because you deserve it necessarily, but because I don't want to carry that anger anymore. You were wrong about me. You hurt me deeply, but I survived and became strong anyway. Maybe stronger than I would have been if you'd supported me from the beginning. So yes, Father, I forgive you. Her father's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. That's more grace than I earned. Isla, one more question. Your instructor, Kieran, he's not human, is he? Isla glanced at Kieran, who nodded permission. No, he's vampire. 4,000 years old, and he recognized my potential when no human could, because he's seen enough warriors across millennia to identify talent regardless of its form. And you're going to become vampire too? Her father guessed. Eventually, Isla confirmed. In a few months, actually. I'll transform into something supernatural, develop these abilities to their full potential, and spend eternity as warrior you never imagined possible. That's my future, Father. Not the military service you wanted, but something far more extraordinary. I can see that, Colonel Morgan said with sad smile. I won't be alive to witness it. But Isla, wherever I am, I'll be proud. The daughter I called shame became the warrior I should have celebrated. That's my legacy. Teaching you to be strong enough to succeed despite me, not because of me. And somehow, that feels like honor too. 3 months after her father's death, Isla accepted vampire transformation. The process was agonizing. 3 days of pain as her body died and resurrected as something supernatural. But when she emerged, she understood immediately why Kieran had insisted she wait. Her supernatural sensitivity, already formidable as human, exploded into capabilities that redefined what combat mastery could mean. She could sense opponents through walls, perceive attacks minutes before they developed, read emotional states with perfect accuracy. The abilities she'd developed as human became exponentially more powerful as vampire. You're extraordinary, Kieran said with genuine awe as they trained in her new body. I've trained warriors for 4,000 years. You're the most naturally gifted I've ever encountered. Your father had no idea what he was rejecting when he called you weak. He figured it out eventually, Isla replied. That's what matters. He died knowing I wasn't shameful, that I was honor he'd been too blind to recognize. That's closure, Kieran. Not perfect, but sufficient. Over the following decades, Isla established herself as legendary warrior in vampire society. Her unique combination of supernatural sensitivity and methodical training made her nearly unbeatable in combat. She became instructor herself, teaching other vampires techniques that incorporated her perception-based approach. You're revolutionizing how we think about combat, an ancient vampire elder told her after observing one of her training sessions. Most warriors rely on strength and speed. You've proven that awareness and precision matter more. You're changing fundamental assumptions about what makes someone formidable. I learned that from being called weak, Isla explained. When you can't rely on conventional strength, you develop alternative approaches. My human limitations forced me to be creative, and that creativity became my greatest advantage once I had supernatural abilities to channel it through. Her relationship with Kieran deepened into genuine partnership that transcended the mate bond. They trained together, fought together, built life together that honored both their individual strengths and their combined potential. I love you more now than the day I sensed your presence, Kieran confessed during quiet evening together. Watching you develop from fragile human, the world rejected, into legendary vampire warrior has been privilege of my 4,000 years. You're everything I hoped you'd become and more. I love you for seeing what I could be before I saw it myself, Isla replied. For recognizing honor when everyone else saw shame. For training me patiently rather than dismissing me as others did. You gave me not just immortality, Kieran. You gave me belief in myself. That's the real transformation. A century after her human death, vampire historians documented Isla's story. The weak daughter her father called shame, who became warrior so skilled, she redefined combat mastery. They called her the sensitive warrior, the one who proved that strength comes in forms conventional fighters couldn't recognize. But Isla had simpler understanding of her journey. She'd been told she was shameful, believed it for years, then learned the truth, that shame was never hers to carry, that she'd always possessed honor, waiting for someone perceptive enough to recognize it. The weak daughter became the warrior. The shame became the honor, and she had eternity to prove that being different was never the same as being defective.